Now let's take a look at circle graphs. But before we begin, I'm giving you a heads up. We will not be creating the circle graphs ourselves. That requires a protractor, and I'm not too sure if all of you have one of those at home, so we are just going to skip over that this semester. But we will be looking at how to interpret circle graphs and get information from them. But before we start, let's look at this line graph refresher at the top here. So line graphs, let's circle the ones that describe one. It has bars to represent the data. No, it does not. Line graphs are the one graph we looked at that don't have bars. Remember, histograms have bars as well as bar graphs. Data is plotted as points. Yes, that's correct. We would plot the data as points and then we would connect those points with lines to create our graph. Often the line can be extended. Yes, that's true as well. We looked into that in multiple of the examples to help us extrapolate or interpolate data that we didn't have in our data set originally. So we could often see a trend happening, which actually allows us to circle this fourth one here. And if we could recognize a trend in the line graph, it would easily allow us to extend the line and get some more data from that. But now let's look at circle graphs. So Tabitha's graph shows how much she plans to spend out of every dollar she earns. She divided her expenses into two groups: necessities, such as housing, supporting, and health; non-necessities, such as clothing, phone bill, and entertainment. And the one they don't mention over there is the savings. So she'll also be putting some into her savings account. So last week, Tabitha spent $300 on necessities. How much does she plan to budget for savings and non-necessities? So to begin, let's start by writing the other fraction on the graph. Write the percents on the graph as well. So the other fraction they're talking about is this savings one over here. So we need to decide what fraction of the whole circle this little chunk here is. Well, in order to do that, let's kind of think back to elementary math when we were just learning fractions, and we would often use those little cardboard cutouts of a pizza to help us learn fractions and part of a whole. So this little piece here, let's see how many times that size piece could fit in our whole circle. So I'm just going to roughly draw in here more chunks that are the same size as that pink one there. Okay, so I drew them in, and if we count them all, we have 6 total. So that means this little chunk here is going to be 1/6 of the whole. So the fraction is 1/6. Now the next thing this wants us to do is write the percents on the graph. So how we're going to do that is we're going to convert each of these fractions into a percent. So 1/2, let's convert that. We would do 1 divided by 2 in our calculator, and we would get 0.5. And then we're going to take that 0.5 and times it by 100, and that will give us our percent, which is 50% over here. Next, let's look at the non-necessities. 1/3. So in our calculator, we're going to do 1 divided by 3, which is equal to 0.3 repeated. And if we multiply that by 100, we will get 33%. And finally, this 1/6 here, so we're going to do 1 divided by 6 in our calculator, which gives us 0.16 repeating. And if we do 0.16 repeating in our calculator times 100, we get 16.6%. And I guess for the 33% over here, we could also write that as 33.3%. Here, I'll put that in up here. So why is a circle graph a good choice for displaying the data? Well, the whole reason we use circle graphs is so we compare parts to a whole. So the data shows parts of a whole. So when we're looking at this circle graph here, it's really easy for our brains to see that she's going to spend 50%, half of her budget, on necessities. And it's also easy for us to see that savings is going to get the least amount of her budget, which is 1/6. So now let's compare these sectors here and try to figure out how much money she's putting in each of them. So the sector for necessities is blank times the sector for savings. So we're comparing necessities to savings. Now remember, in that necessities sector, it tells us up here that she spent $300 on it. So we need to figure out how much bigger this necessities sector here is compared to the savings one. So how many of these savings chunks could we fit into that necessities chunk? Well, if we split it up like we did before, we could fit 3 of those savings chunks into the necessities. So that means necessities is 3 times as big, or 3 times the sector for savings. So since Tabitha spent $300 on necessities, how much does she plan to save? Well, we're going to take that $300, and since we know that this amount is 3 times as big as the savings, let's divide it by 3 and we will get the savings amount. So 300 divided by 3 is $100. So Tabitha should plan to save $100. Finally, let's look at the non-necessities compared to the savings. So the sector for non-necessities is blank times the sector for savings. So again, let's do the same thing. How many of these little savings sectors could we fit into the non-necessities one? So if we're roughly drawing it in here, we could fit 2 of them. So the non-necessities is 2 times the sector for savings. We know that Tabitha saved, and here I'll write it in the graph, we know she saved $100. We just calculated that over here. Tabitha saved $100. So if we take that $100 and we times it by 2, we will get what the non-necessities is, which is $200. Because remember, we determined 2 of these chunks could fit into this sector over here. So we take that 100, times it by 2, 100 here, 100 here, and that makes 200 total in the non-necessities. So Tabitha should plan to spend $200 on non-necessities. And this is all we're going to be looking at for the circle graphs in this booklet. On the next page, we aren't going to fill it out, okay? So you can cross this one out. This is all about creating circle graphs, and we're just not going to look at that this year.